One is what we've just been speaking about, that although we have made progress in the elimination of mother-to-child transmission of HIV, we are still having a challenge. In 2022, we had almost 4,400 children who acquired HIV from their mothers. And that's a really big challenge for this country. And this is happening when the science is there, when you have the medication, and the only thing that you don't have is that cooperation that you could have had between the mothers who are giving birth with the doctors and the community to support them from suffering from the stigma and discrimination that then stops them from accessing the medication. So that is a big challenge of how to address stigma and ensure every person who is planning to get a baby, either be a man or a woman or a young person, knows that the first step they need to do is to have a diagnosis done, and we usually do 2 diagnoses in this country. We check for HIV and we also check for syphilis, which both of them have high level of negative consequences to the unborn child. So that is one of the challenges that we have. The second challenge is the challenge of adolescents. And this challenge of adolescents, again, is when you have adolescent mothers, just like the professor has said, that they have not developed to the level of them to make appropriate decisions for themselves. Again, these adolescent mothers, if they are pregnant in school, and if the pregnancy happened as a result of sexual encounter, which we know, and unprotected one, which we know, it means that they also are at risk of HIV. And if they're in school and that pregnancy is only discovered sometimes when they're giving birth, sometimes not even in a hospital, then again we have a challenge therein, especially to help them prevent the children who are getting babies, to prevent their children from also getting infected. We also know that adolescent pregnancies make them more vulnerable when they're struggling for sanitary towels. They begin to struggle for both sanitary towels and the diapers for the baby and the food for the baby. So even if they don't get HIV at the time of sexual exposure, they then become vulnerable, and they then could also engage in transactional sex because the challenges that they are living in have increased. The other challenge we have is young people in general, and in particular boys and men. And this area is twofold. One, it is around the issue of drug use, and especially the injecting drug practices that has been on the increase. Currently, we have about 8,800 clients who we give a drug every morning to ensure that they stop injecting heroin. We know here at the coast that is the biggest challenge, and the coast province contributes the highest number of people who inject drugs, and mostly those are young men. And the drug injecting practices has 2 issues. One, HIV because of sharing the injecting needles, and the other one is hepatitis, viral hepatitis, which also has a challenge in management, and also it's also expensive to manage. We also seen high cases of tuberculosis among the men who inject drugs, and when they have HIV and tuberculosis, we are losing them. We see in our drug centers that we are losing so many of them. Again, men and boys, the adherence rates to antiretroviral drugs is quite low as compared to women and girls. And although HIV is more prevalent among women and girls, we lose more men and boys to HIV because of one, they don't come to the hospital early. We only get them in the TB clinics, and when they are sometimes very sick or they've been sent to the hospital because of pneumonia or any other disease. So that's a challenge we have, and what we are trying to do now is to talk about early diagnosis of men and boys, because that is also a huge challenge. We're also having a challenge of emerging pockets of epidemic in counties that were not traditionally having HIV. While we are making progress in counties such as Homa Bay, the ones that Professor spoke about in the western part of the country, we begin to see counties, especially those that were traditionally not mentioned around HIV, like Samburu County. We begin to see the cases spiking up in even the far northern part of the country. We have Mandera coming up. We have counties such as Garissa. While the cases are few, we are concerned that if nothing happens, those few cases, if they remain unchecked, and people don't access treatment, then we would have a challenge. So the Triple Threat Campaign, this is an initiative that is trying to seek commitment from all the stakeholders, both the government as well as communities, because we recognize that the challenge of having too many girls drop out of school in 1 year. For example, when you say 260,000 girls dropped out of school in 1 year because they presented themselves at the antenatal clinic as pregnant, it means that in a couple of years, for example, in just under 6 years, we have had almost 2 million, 2.7 million girls who have come to a facility to deliver. What that means for those girls, it means that they'll have children. And what means that for those children, it means that there is likelihood of a poverty cycle. There is likelihood of reinforcing the challenges that the girl faced and also creating another vulnerability to HIV. The other issue that we have as a country is the number of sexual and gender-based violence cases and sexual violence. And this also is a key challenge, again, for the adolescents and the young people. And then finally, of course, it is a fact that HIV itself is beginning to manifest as an epidemic that is now majorly for young adults and adolescents. So we are speaking about from the ages of 10 to the ages of about 35, it is where our challenge lies, especially as far as sexual transmission and the drug use is concerned. So in a nutshell, the Triple Threat Initiative recognizes that challenge and focuses on trying to address the challenge the adolescent child is facing so that we can be able to reverse the trends of HIV among those groups.
Because now I'm aging with HIV. I'm not the only one. There are people aging with HIV. So there are things that are coming up. There is the NCDs, non-communicable diseases. You have heart disease. You have all those. So we really need the partners. We really need the national syndemic to coordinate funds for research so that we look at what has happened to our bodies for taking drugs for so long. And how can we be sure that we treat the NCDs that come with HIV? As we age, of course, most of the people have those non-communicable diseases. You have heart disease, you have arthritis, you have all those. Science needs to see how does those taking medication for diabetes and taking ARVs, how can they know that this is not affecting the other one? So we need science. Then, of course, we need funding. We need policies to be put in place that can support issues of people living with HIV.
Today, with the antiretroviral drugs that we have, less than 1 in 100, less than 1%, as what we say, will get the infection. So the research work that has been done, a lot of it in Kenya and elsewhere in the world, has led us to a point where we can talk about ending AIDS in children. The other very important finding, and it was a surprising finding, you know how you're doing research, you're analyzing the data, was the identification that breastfeeding HIV-infected women who are not on any antiretroviral drugs had a 3-fold increased likelihood of dying. Because the studies were randomized, we were able to give very definite information. And for those who had advanced disease, you heard Dorothy talk about how you waited to be treated. It was a terrible time, you know. You waited to get sick so that you can get the ARVs. Now, for the women who had advanced HIV, there was a 14-fold increased risk of dying. And then, for their children, even if they were not HIV infected, if your mother dies, you have an 8-fold increased chance of dying as a young child.
One of the prevention options prevention method that has been that has really helped to reduce the number of infections, especially for Dr. Maisha. Maisha is the CEO of National Systemic Disease Control Council. She will be joined by women infected HIV and is in Kenya, and Professor Ndwati, who is a pediatrician. transitionary